Welcome to the SparcStart TA Leader Series, where we get to talk to people with interesting perspectives and experiences and add something new to the thought process about TA and how you do it really well. Today, I'm thrilled to have as my guest, Lisa LaFleur. Lisa, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Maury. First of all, it's a pleasure to actually, have the ability to speak to you today. When I got the ask to come on, I was very excited about it, and I've looked into some of the things that you've been doing, and very excited about what you've personally been doing as well. So, to introduce myself, Lisa LaFleur, I've been a TA leader for north of 25 years now. So I've actually grown up in the recruiting area and done a lot of things around strategy and really developing people programs, right? Holistic approaches around developing people, around the strategies around how you hire for companies in a variety of segments, and how you do it with people mindset, right? With people first strategies to attract them and retain them into companies. So that's what I've been doing for the past 25 years, really building into, leadership of bigger organizations. And I've started to look at how I can bring that to, smaller groups and organizations as well. So happy to be here and talk about, what the future of work is looking like now.
And I think we're all trying to some degree to figure out what the future of work looks like. But you have an interesting perspective that you come from very much a people first perspective. Mm-hmm. It can be easy to get caught up in looking at, hiring workloads, rec numbers, all of that, and lose the humanity to it, particularly now that we've got so much automation involved. AI is going to have a role here. I don't think any of us know exactly where that's going to net out, but it's going to be part of what we do, which removes the human element a little bit more. When we look at the attraction piece of this, I think you'll agree that if you do attraction well, your retention is also better. What are your thoughts on key elements? What do people need to do on the attraction side from a very people, I don't want to say personal, because that sounds like customizing to an individual. And that's hard to do strategically. But keeping in mind that these are human beings that you're bringing into an organization that you're hoping will become part of a community. What do TA leaders need to be looking at, or at least safeguarding against, perhaps, as they start to use all these technologies and so forth?
Well, I mean, the one thing I look at, for me is it's an inside out approach, right? The things that I've done internally to grow my teams, to be out there recruiting and finding the right talent, regardless of what industry it is, right? Is to have really good processes and, thought leadership that's really driving strategy that we're always continuously improving. So, working with companies, to help them to do that and to help drive that automation. But with that human element, because you have to, right? There's always going to be process and things that are going to evolve over time. But the human element is really important because there's people on the other end of that computer, right? There's somebody on the end of that screen. And when we talk about a lot of the automation that it's happening, it dehumanizes things. And you have to have kind of a combination of that, right? There are certain things that can be automated and things that really should be done in a face-to-face or at least a virtual face-to-face type of an environment, right? Because that's how you get to know people. And I've always felt that I want to work with people that help fill the gaps of information that I don't know, right? So I don't need to be the smartest person there. I just need to be the one smart enough to hire the smartest people in the room, right? So, surrounding yourselves by good people means you got to talk to them. You can't do it through just AI. You've got to make those connections, and that's a part of the attraction. But then the other part of that really, Maury, is what do you do after you've got them, right? How do you bring them through that process, onboard them, and then make them a part of your organization that feels like they belong? Because a company can say that they're going to do these things for you to attract you over, but then they got to walk that walk too. And that's where the retention part of it cocomes into play, right? So
it's really hard. It's really hard to do. I mean, it's easy to talk that talk. There's a piece you mentioned, you alluded to this on the human side. One of the things that I think often gets lost is how complicated and multi-leveled the decision to accept a job is. I think
Mhm.
we understand that pay needs to be competitive, and remote versus on-site, those are big factors. And people say, oh yeah, and whether or not, we have benefits and so forth.
Mhm.
But it really is much more complex than that. And I think when we go to automation, we lose a lot of the information that makes people feel comfortable accepting a position or a role. And we lose the people side of it. We think, oh, as long
Yeah.
as we've got the best salary out there, we're going to attract whoever we want. That doesn't
Mhm.
happen. People are more complicated than that. Any thoughts on how you bridge that gap and a really
Yeah,
understanding the
well,
complexity of that?
I'd say, I mean, we definitely learned a lot going through the pandemic, right? And what that change meant for people, right? We were all in it together. And I mean, there were some companies that came out really strong with that mantra, right? We're in this together, and started doing the virtual stuff and what have you. And work patterns changed, right? People needed to work from home, and there was a lot of accommodations that were made, a lot of accommodations that are great, that empower people, a lot of flexibility in their life, because they were no longer tied to necessarily that same 9 to 5 in every role. Many roles needed to be, right. You had your essential workers and so forth. And that was a whole other level of complexity, right? Because you had childcare issues, and you had specific demographics and so forth that were impacted more so than others. And how do you get them back into, the workforce effectively? And, so there are always challenges, but that one we learned, I think, a lot, and we made forward strides in the automation, but now we're kind of at that precipice of, which way is this going to go? Because there's so many positives to it, but it has to be done correctly to make sure that it is considerate of people and the way people need to live and work and survive, and not just survive, but thrive. Right.
Right. And there
And
was
that's work-life
downside.
balance. And that's the ability to have that flexibility and have leadership that, that is understanding, of these things, and not just the
But
cultural stuff, right? The day-to-day
but
responsibilities.
there was a downside to it too. I mean, there was
Mm-hmm.
a lot of there was a ton of social isolation. We saw mental health issues go up. We saw substance abuse go up. We saw, spousal abuse go up.
Mm-hmm.
For not everyone thrived being home all day, every day.
Not at
And
all. Not at all.
so
You're right
the
about that.
idea that, oh, remote's great for everybody, we should strive to go there. It wasn't. It certainly gave more flexibility to people. That there was upside to it, but particularly, I tended to focus on the social isolation of an awful lot of people who didn't
Mm-hmm.
have that community of work. You
Yeah.
can grumble about coworkers, but it does give you some more community. And I think we're all still struggling with where is that balance? What's right for one group of people isn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily right for every group of people.
Yeah. And how
And
do you come
that,
back? You're right. It is about that balance. Me as somebody who's worked from home for over 20 years, right? It was just another day in the office, but it was really an ability to help others understand how you make that transition, right? How do you take something that you're reliant on somebody being in the office for, and take that process and get it into a virtual setting where people can do that. And I mean, technology has advanced so much that it was an easy thing to do in some roles, not other roles. No, but it was a learning process, right? And we learned how to, in the recruiting world, we learned how to scale up very quickly, because we went from my organization, that to support a bunch of different companies, right? We went and really in 1 year went from 6 to 60, right?
uh,
In COVID, because we needed that many people to recruit for all these companies, because they were just in such dire need. So we had to be more agile and bring on more people and such, but you had to be attractive, and have the company values that people would come to, because they could jump somewhere else, right? So now I feel like there's a little bit of a re-leveling, happening in the recruiting world right now, right? Where people are now looking at, is this what they want, where they want to be, and what they want to do? Because I do think that, the whole isolation, from COVID, because people were isolated. I mean, it does change the way that people interact and what they hold, to be dear to them and what they're passionate about.
right. And we also saw with people who are working remotely, you completely eliminated the geographic barrier to switching jobs. So
Mm-hmm.
it's no longer, gee, this is the best job I can get in West Falmouth, Pennsylvania, because there's not a lot else out there. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, there's a lot of opportunities. And that had people rethinking what was possible, rethinking what they really wanted to do. We kind of went through the Great Resignation, but
Mm-hmm.
um, I think now people are feeling that it's easier to switch jobs when they've got remote opportunities,
Yeah.
or they can at least apply to things. If there's a job on the West Coast and they're sitting in the South, it doesn't matter anymore. So applications are certainly up, and it seems like there's more possibility. But also, as we see the layoffs go on, we're seeing a lot of remote people are the first ones out. So there's, like everything, there's balance involved here. So
There is.
yeah, and
Balance.
I think it's tough for the TA leaders to understand who they're trying to attract and how they're trying to attract them, or even
Mm-hmm.
understand what they can offer them, because their own organizations are changing so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So to be authentic and real and say, we've seen a lot of companies who said, we will be remote forever. And 9 months later said, oh, come back to the office.
Yeah.
And it's not that the recruiters were dishonest. They were working with the information they had. They
Yeah.
had
The
computers.
conditions changed.
Yeah,
They
yep.
changed. And now, I mean, it opens up all this, we're talking about real estate that's out there that's half empty, or, you look at what's happening now with, with building and such. I mean, there's a lot more, there's a lot more empty buildings I see out there that once housed, corporations that are working remotely, because you
Mhm.
can, and it's, there's a lot of value in that, for people and for companies in doing so. But there's also, that means you got to vet through what's real too as a job seeker, because that also means that it's a much bigger world out there, that there's a lot of fraud and scams that are happening. So being smart about companies that you're pursuing is also, important, because you never know what's on the other end of that. That's where the
Yeah.
human element comes into, hiring and attracting people. You have to be able to, to have that connection. The computer can't do it yet, and I hope it
And
never does.
yeah, you're right with the fraud piece. When you used to come in on site and see people and see an organization and get a feel for the vibe and the feel for how people interacted and so forth. As a candidate, you can't do that anymore. At best, you're doing one-on-one Zoom interviews,
Mm-hmm.
which can be in a completely isolated environment like the one you or I are in right now. You have no sense of what the vibe in either of our offices are.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to judge. And how, as a TA leader, you try to add some of that texture to the offer to give candidates a sense, and the credibility piece. We're finding
Yeah.
it's pretty easy as a candidate to be highly skeptical. So
Well, and it's
interesting.
our job as TA leaders to actually get to know our people too, right? We are people organizations. We're talking about human resources, right? So we should know and understand our people and their challenges, and what motivates them too, to help them grow in an environment that's remote, because that's hard too, because it's easy to get complacent. So
Yeah.
how do we as TA leaders keep them interested in developing, and and looking at future opportunities and growing, and how do we do that successfully? There's only so many times you can bring together companies, for big corporate events and such. When you start to look at how your workforce not only goes remote, but now it opens up, nationwide, in some case globally, right? We work with global teams all over the place. So there's only so much that you can do to get together. So how do you keep that sense of belonging and that camaraderie, that people side of it, that helps people to really align with the company that they work with?
And how do you do training when it's so hard to model the behavior for someone when they're not around to observe you? There's a lot of what people learn in jobs. They learn from hearing other conversations, seeing how people deal with conflict, watching people handle uncomfortable all the things that you get to observe when you're in the office now are
Mm-hmm.
happening one-on-one remotely through a Zoom call or through a correspondence you're not privy to. Yeah, when you look at the kinds of things, you can send people to classes, but that's different. A
Yeah.
lot of the skills people need aren't necessarily classroom taught. So big
Mhm.
challenges. Well, Lisa, thank you. You and I think could go on for a long time.
We
Uh,
could.
but I think it's, these are really challenging times for TA leaders. There are so many things they're dealing with that they haven't had to deal with before, or been brought to the forefront in almost a crisis mode that were part of their job, but not necessarily borderline crisis. So it's always interesting to step back and look at some of those things that have bubbled up. So Lisa,
Yeah,
thank
you
you.
never
I
know how it'll
appreciate it.
evolve.
Right, Rita. Nice to talk to you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thanks.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, Maury.